This is the most beautiful acoustic guitar you have ever seen. A Gibson Custom Shop SJ200.
What's it worth?
It's an expensive guitar, man.
I mean, what's your best price on it?
I can do 90.
I'll give you 85.
I've got to have 90.
Okay. Change your mind, call me.
85, man.
All right.
You have never seen a more exquisite acoustic guitar than this one, an SJ200 Gibson Custom Shop. How much is it worth? Man, that instrument costs a lot. What's your best deal on it exactly? I'm capable of 90. I'll give you 85. I must have 90. All right, reconsider. Man, call me 85. Okay. Many historical artifacts had passed through the gold and silver pawn store, but few of them have the seriousness of the case Landon brought in. One of the rarest guitars ever created. A 1941 Gibson SJ200 that rock icon Stephen Stills once played was found within. This is a Gibson SJ200 from 1941. Stephen Stills of the group Crosby, Stills and Nash owned it. This was more than a pawn deal at that point. In human hands, it was history. What transpired then, when the notoriously brutal negotiator Rick Harrison was confronted with a piece of music royalty? I would like having this guitar in my own. It's lovely. It is uncommon. It belonged to a legendary figure in rock and roll. How did one guitar lead to a decision worth $85,000? And when profit is neglected, show what really counts. Come learn about the $1 million guitar that stunned one of the most brutal negotiators in history. Time forgot the Gibson's holy grail. We must first comprehend the true significance of the 1941 Gibson SJ200 before we can comprehend why Rick found this moment to be so important. What a great instrument the J200 is. It truly is. In 1938, Gibson started producing the SJ200. Known as the jumbo model, it was unquestionably the most expensive guitar Gibson had ever made. The SJ200 was the ultimate example of guitar design. It was lovely until World War II broke out, with the United States joining the conflict in 1941. Just before 8 in the morning on Sunday, December 7th, 1941. The amateur manufacturing priorities completely shifted after Japan unexpectedly attacked the United States of America by bombing the U.S. naval base in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Like the majority of American businesses, Gibson had to modify its output in order to aid in the war effort. The SJ200 was no longer produced. For collectors, the chronology was disastrous. Only from 1938 until America's entry into the war, the SJ200 was manufactured. This indicated that very few of these guitars were ever made, just a few dozen or perhaps fewer. Expert Jesse Amoroso's response to the guitar Landon brought into the pawn shop was instantaneous and visceral. It's the SJ200 from 1941. It was the best guitar they had. After launching this model in 1938, they went to war and ceased production. He gripped it as if it were made of glass. Every collector of vintage guitars hopes to find a 1941 Gibson SJ200. It's the one that escaped. Every dusty attic search and estate sale is plagued by this phantom, and now one was seated in the Las Vegas pawn shop for gold and silver. The guitar's age was evident in its state. There were fixes and cracks. It wasn't flawless, but that added to its authenticity. However, this instrument had an additional feature that would make it completely indestructible instead of just priceless. Stephen Stills, a co-founder of Buffalo Springfield Crosby, Stills and Nash, and Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, was the owner of the instrument. Deja Vu was recorded in 1969 by the supergroup Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. It is regarded as one of the best records from the rock period. Stephen Stills, one of the most significant performers in rock and roll history, was legendary in a way that went beyond his level of fame. On the same day, Elvis received 2 inductions into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. On the same day, he was inducted for Buffalo Springfield, followed by Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young. Such acknowledgement is really uncommon. It implies that he not only produced excellent music, but also radically altered the course of music. Stills was still alive too. This instrument was not a relic from a bygone period because he was still touring. It was an actual link to a live legend, someone who could be interviewed at the pawn store. The paperwork added even more value to the guitar. Additionally, you have documentation. Stephen Stills was this person. The bill of sale is with me. Bill of sale. This is to confirm that a Gibson J200 guitar was sold in 1940. The collector who brought it in, Landon, had more than just the guitar. Stephen Stills personally had signed a bill of sale for him. He had the documentation trail that unequivocally demonstrated that one of the greatest rock musicians had owned and played this instrument. Rick Harrison recognized the importance right away. He was staring at a tangible piece of American music history, not just a guitar. Rick Harrison was now in a difficult situation. He owned a 1941 Gibson SJ200 that had belonged to Stephen Stills, the man who had revolutionized the rock and roll genre. However, what was the true value of it? And would Rick Harrison be prepared to shell out whatever amount was required for such an iconic instrument? The guitar expert Jesse Amoroso examined the instrument with the attention of someone handling antiquated antiquities. When a guitar becomes a fortune, he touched the wood with his hands. His face changed as he felt the resonance of an 80-year-old Gibson through his fingertips after checking the joints and playing a few notes. When he was finished, his evaluation was unambiguous and conclusive. This 1941 Gibson SJ200 was valued between $75,000 and $90,000 as a vintage guitar on its own, ignoring its Stephen Stills provenance. The instrument alone is probably valued between $75,000 and $90,000. That's a huge sum of money for only one guitar. However, the magic that Stephen Stills had owned it came next. Its value increased by an additional $20,000 to $30,000 just from that face. A guitar, an instrument composed of only a piece of metal and wood and strings that could generate sound, was valued at between $95,000 and $120,000. Rick Harrison gazed at those figures. He was no longer dealing with the typical dynamics of a pawn shop or with someone who had come in desperate to sell a family treasure due to medical bills or job loss. Landon has a passion for collecting guitars. He wanted a fair market value for his possessions because he was aware of their worth. $110,000 was Landon's asking price. The professional appraisal was in the midst of that. It was just, at that point, an extraordinary event took place. Beneath all the economic ability, Rick Harrison made a choice that exposed a deeper aspect of his personality. Rick didn't accept Landon's offer right away. He was unable to. Negotiation was the foundation of his entire existence, but this negotiation was unique. Rick asked Landon about the paperwork after bringing in his crew. Once more, simply type it on an envelope. That is really expert. Bill of sale for Criteria Recording Studios, huh? He inquired about the legitimacy, the repairs, the state of the wood, and the bill of sale. He was conducting rigorous due diligence, as he always does. However, there was more going on behind the surface. Rick was having trouble. He was truly torn. He was once the businessman figuring out profit margins. In the next instant, he was the young man who had developed an adolescent passion for automobiles. The man who realized that some things in the world are worth more than money. He was the one who had lost his family while creating an empire. Rick Harrison, the inventor of Pawn Star, is currently grieving the loss of his son, Adam. On social media, the TV star honored his late son. He was faced with an item that stood for everything his dominion had been attempting to assert. Link to history, connection to excellence, and connection to anything significant. The bargaining dance started between Rick and Landon. $10,000 was what Landon desired. Rick's initial offer was significantly lower. Negotiations at pawn shops operate in this manner. You begin at a modest price and work your way up until you reach a compromise. However, the numbers continued to rise. This guitar was too good for Rick to lowball. After the negotiations progressed to $90,000 and then $95,000, Rick ultimately offered $85,000. Landon approved Rick's $85,000 bid right away, but the seller then disclosed that $85,000 was actually more than his profit margin. Harrison wasn't the only one who struck it rich then. Rick purchased the Stephen Stills Gibson SJ200 for $85,000. He didn't really buy it for that reason, even though he knew he could probably sell it for more. He purchased it because he forgot how to be a businessman when he was holding that instrument and realized its significance and history. He recalled what it meant to be human. However, the guitar wasn't the first priceless item that Pawn Stars has ever purchased. What other valuables have entered Rick Harrison's store? Rick Harrison's pawn shop proprietors. I would like to introduce you to Rick Harrison, who you may know from the television show Pawn Stars. In addition, he owns a pawn store in Las Vegas that sells gold and silver, largest cash purchases. Lowball offers are frequently linked to Pawn Stars, but occasionally an item enters the gold and silver pawn store that defies expectations. These are the times when six-figure cash agreements suddenly make sense, and Rick Harrison begins to think like a historian instead of a reseller. These purchases, which range from priceless machinery and music legends to precious metals, demonstrate that sometimes the true worth goes well beyond the price tag. A fatherly piece of advice led to one of the most subtly brilliant bargains. A man's father had encouraged him to invest in something genuine years before. He invested his cash on over 200 pounds of silver, heeding that advice. 12 years later, the silver market had skyrocketed. The seller wasn't there to gamble when he entered Rick's store. He was making money. Rick saw the potential right away. The cost of silver has increased dramatically. He could move quickly on this deal because there was a clear profit margin and considerable demand. However, the verification came first. In order to verify the silver's purity, Rick put it through a series of tests, including drilling into the bars, an act that reassures buyers while always making sellers unhappy. Rick didn't think twice once he was satisfied. He paid an incredible $111,000 to acquire the hoard. Then there came the vehicle that essentially changed the meaning of luxury. Lincoln Roadster from 1932. My car is a 1932 Lincoln convertible V12. In the 1930s, Lincoln produced some of the most innovative automobiles ever. Was a moving tribute to American engineers prior to the war. The Roadster was more powerful than other automobiles of its time because to its 150 horsepower V12 engine, which was designed with comfort and elegance in mind. This was not a car for the typical driver. It was created for elites who desired equal parts muscle and elegance. Rick and the elderly man realized they were looking at something unique when they examined an extraordinarily well-preserved copy. Such vehicles are rare, and when they do appear, they are extremely expensive. The negotiations were quick and audacious. Even by Pawn Star standards, Rick's cash payment of $95,000 was enormous. However, the tale didn't stop there. The seller quickly pushed the money back across the counter and used it to purchase $95,000 worth of gold, a move that perfectly encapsulated the bizarre beauty of the event. Let's get started. One more time. The finest investment you can make right now, in my opinion, is gold. These days, a dollar doesn't buy much. In a single transaction, one famous asset was traded for another. History hummed with the sound of another guitar, a Gibson SG from 1961. Although the Les Paul isn't unique in and of itself, it had a legacy that few other instruments could match. Les Paul's wife and musical collaborator Mary Ford owned it. Between 1950 and 1954, Mary and Les sold millions of albums, co-wrote 16 top 10 singles, and permanently changed popular music. Rock music would later be defined by Les Paul's solid body guitar design. This guitar was connected to more than just that revolution. It was a component of it. Knowing its worth, the seller first demanded an enticing $250,000. Ever the negotiator, Rick firmly resisted. He ultimately paid $90,000 for the guitar. You can have it if you want to pay $90,000. Okay, $90,000. Deal. Okay, put it in writing. Man, hurry up. We have a ton of paperwork to complete. Thus, it was his biggest guitar purchase to date. Surprisingly, these weren't the only amazing finds Rick made while working as a pawnmaster, and the manner in which some were found added to the intrigue of the tale. The most unexpected big money deals are with stars. A poker game was the starting point of one of the most improbable six-figure neighboring deals. A man carrying what appeared to be a plain silver dollar entered the gold and silver pawn store. He clarified that he thought it was worth about $20,000 and that he had won it in a card game years prior. Nice money, but nothing extravagant. But this coin was not your typical silver dollar. It was a proof piece high-relief dollar from 1922. Received a coin with a matte surface and high relief from 1922. All right. How did you obtain this? At a poker game, I won it. Only an estimated 10 to 12 specimens of this coin are thought to remain. Rick realized right away that this needed professional eyes. Following a thorough analysis, the valuation was significantly altered, depending on the coin's condition and customer demand. The expert calculated that its value may range from $50,000 to $100,000. What had begun as a small poker prize turned into a relic worthy of a museum. Rick didn't think twice. The two came to an agreement at $80,000 after some haggling. One of the largest coin purchases in the history of the program, it's a prime illustration of hidden value. However, that is by no means all. Rick's weakness has always been cars. And few things pique his interest like vintage American roadsters. When a brand new jet black 1932 custom Ford Roadster arrived at the shop, that enthusiasm was evident. This was more than a classic that had been restored. It was a contemporary beast dressed in retro attire. With only 450 miles on the clock and a 500 horsepower engine, the vehicle combined classic design with contemporary power. Rick and Corey engaged into a heated negotiation with the owner right away. The car was in almost perfect condition, and the price was simply increased due to its scarcity. The pivotal moment occurred when legendary Las Vegas custom car driver Danny the Count Coker saw it, and obviously fell in love. Rick was aware that there would be strong demand if Danny desired it. He was motivated to seal the sale by that insight. Rick ultimately paid $68,250 to get the Roadster. For it, we do $67, $68.50, $67.50, $68.50, $68,250. Okay, we've got a deal, dude. A hazardous purchase, but one supported by market attraction and professional enthusiasm. When Rick went to Atlanta for one of the biggest coin auctions in the country, coins once again grabbed center stage. He wasn't shopping for himself this time. He was searching for a particular item for a client who was prepared to pay a premium. A 1915 Panama Pacific octagonal $50 gold coin was the goal, one of the most unique and sought-after coins ever made by the U.S. Mint. These coins were made to honor the Panama Canal's opening, a significant engineering feat that altered international trade. This coin's octagonal appearance, in contrast to conventional round coins, made it readily identifiable and extremely valuable. It was difficult to find one. After identifying two viable possibilities, Rick started negotiating, carefully weighing the terms and the price. In the end, he won one for $67,500, which was much below his customer's $70,000 budget, and demonstrated Rick's abilities outside of the pawn shop. The worth of what passed Rick's counter increased along with the show's popularity. But what other astounding bargains would soon follow if a single coin could get close to $70,000? Pawn Star's most astounding $50,000 offers. The quality of goods that came through the gold and silver pawn shop's doors increased along with Pawn Star's popularity. Roaring horsepower and exclusivity accompanied one of the most recent high-value transactions. In 2013, American motorsports legend Roger Penske and automobile rental behemoth Hertz collaborated to develop something completely unanticipated. Just 154 GT Mustangs made especially for Hertz's performance fleet. These weren't your typical rentals. The distinction between a showroom and a racetrack was blurred by these collector-grade muscle cars. Rick realized this wasn't your average used car when a vendor showed up with one of the first 10 ever made. He still sought assurance, though, with so much money on the line. He therefore invited Joey Logano, a professional NASCAR driver, to test drive the Mustang. Rick didn't waste any time when Logano verified the automobile was in perfect shape and operating as it should. The two men struck a $60,000 agreement, giving Rick access to an uncommon contemporary item with immediate market value. Soon after, presidential history emerged in a far more subdued but no less potent form. A man entered the store with a cigar box that had rested on President John F. Kennedy's desk in the Oval Office. He described it as a once-in-a-lifetime item. The cigar box that John F. Kennedy used while at the White House is with me. This was neither a replica nor a collectible based on rumors. With multiple unsmoked cigars still inside, it was an authentic piece of White House history. Rick instantly recognized the gravity of the situation. He was aware that another of Kennedy's cigar boxes had sold for more than $500,000 in the 1990s. JFK memorabilia has historically fetched incredible amounts. This example's provenance alone made it exceptional, even though it wasn't anticipated to reach those heights. Rick was able to get the cigar box for $60,000 after thorough haggling. A deal that was more like preserving a moment in American history than it was like making a buy. These three incredible transactions were completed by music history. The Defender Stratocaster, which has influenced rock music for many years, is frequently regarded as the most iconic electric guitar ever produced. Rick knew he was encountering a living piece of music history when renowned British studio guitarist Vic Flick entered the store with his 1961 Fender Stratocaster. The instantly identifiable guitar riff from the original James Bond theme was created by Vic Flick. For more than 60 years, this sound has defined cinematic cool. This particular guitar was also utilized on records by musicians like the Beatles and Tom Jones. Thus, it became ingrained in popular culture. Theatricals and protracted negotiations were unnecessary. Vic, Flick, and Rick both knew exactly what was in front of them. On a $55,000 deal, the two shook hands. "I'll pay $55,000. That seems like a reasonable price to me. I assume all the risk. Okay, deal." "Yes." "All right, come on, let's complete some paperwork." Sealing the sale of a guitar whose worth stemmed from the cultural legacy ingrained in every note it had ever played. Not only from its age or condition. When taken as a whole, these purchases demonstrate the extent of the Pawn Stars universe. From iconic guitars to presidential mementos to contemporary muscle cars. But Rick found expensive fakes for every gold mine. Let's investigate those. There is a painful lesson in the ledger, when even the experts are taken advantage of for every spectacular success. The old guy, Corey, and Rick Harrison all discovered the hard way that instinct and expertise are insufficient to guard against every dud. Sometimes the history of passing through the Golden Sylvie